and find leadership concepts in the news, in articles, and popular media, what have you. We talked on Tuesday, we kind of did this introduction to theories about motivation. And we said, one of the big overarching pieces of motivation is this idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And then we started diving into some theories. And so we talked a little bit about theory X versus theory Y leaders and how that connects with that idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic. And then we discussed the next theory, which was reinforcement theory. So this idea that you can get people to do what they want or what you want them to do by controlling their behavior. And to do that, you can have positive reinforcement or you can have negative reinforcement. What about this article reinforced for you some of the things that we talked about on Tuesday? What did you pick out of it that you're like, oh, I remember talking about that?
That rewarding, like, that in, never mind. I know what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So Ashley kind of started us off with this idea. It talks a lot about rewards. So what does this article say about rewards in general? Does it suggest them, not suggest them? What are some examples they use to back up their claim? Y'all just read it.
A reward offered for finishing early either didn't help or led to increased procrastination.
Yeah, so when we looked at trying to get people not to procrastinate, rewards didn't work. What was another example that they talk about where rewards do not work?
They did the attendance and in school.
Yeah, so rewarding people for attendance didn't really work. What did they mention about whether you should tell people they'll get a reward for doing something or just surprise people at the end who did the appropriate behavior? What was their suggestion there?
They still weren't about it because then they said that the people would expect it next time, and if they didn't, then they felt like they were being manipulated.
Yeah, so you kind of wonder, well, okay, if we don't tell them they're going to get rewarded, then maybe they'll just do it intrinsically and we'll still provide an award at the end. But then what happened was when the people engaged in that behavior again, they were expecting it, and then when they didn't get it, they were teed off, right? Like, mad about it. And so we find that, again, that has the same effect. And so ultimately, this conversation about rewards, and I like that this article was called Science Confirms It, People Aren't Pets, because it goes back to that idea of Pavlov's dog, right? Just because we reward people, we're not going to be able to control their behavior. What does that all confirm or support with what we talked about on Tuesday when it comes to motivation?
Would it be that, like, unless someone's intrinsically motivated, then that the rewards shouldn't matter?
Yes. So intrinsic motivation, that's the thing that is going to keep people motivated in the long term. Rewards are part of extrinsic motivation, and they only work in the short term, but they don't work long term. So that's a really, really important piece to remember about what we talked about on Tuesday. And again, another example that I want to provide y'all of how you can be looking at things in the news, looking at things in popular media, and find direct connections to leadership theories that we talk about. This was an article that came from the New York Times. So you'll just be surprised at the things you can find. Side note, if y'all have never done this, you can set up in Google different searches. Like if you always want to search like leadership, you can set up in Google for them to search news sources or anything that's put out on Google, and it will send you an email alert. You can set it up for it to be daily, once a week, whatever, and you kind of get a summary report of like, hey, what did Google find related to this for the week? That may be a good place to start if you're like, I don't typically read the newspaper or look at this stuff. Well, that's something that's going to come to your email inbox. That would make it a little bit easier for you. Again, it's extra credit. I know it's not going to keep y'all motivated all semester, but I still provide it. All right? So we're going to pick up today where we left off on Tuesday. So again, we got through two major theories. We got through theory X, theory Y. We got through discussing the reinforcement theory. And again, those are all tied really, really closely to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, however, is a little bit different take on motivation, and that it kind of takes this idea of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, puts it into a pyramid and says we have 5 needs as humans. And the bottom needs, the ones that are at the bottom of the pyramid, those are more extrinsic needs, things that can be provided to us externally. But the things at the top are more intrinsic needs, that we're never ever going to have that intrinsic motivation or have those intrinsic needs met unless the ones at the bottom are met. We talked about what physiological needs are and why those are important. We talked about safety and security, and we were just getting to kind of talk about love and belongingness. And to talk about Maslow's theory, we were using the example of school, about what do schools provide students in order to help them be motivated to learn. And we said, okay, with physiological needs, we make sure that they have food. So we have food programs in school. All the things that they need. Safety and security. We try to provide a safe learning environment. We have school resource officers. We have tornado shelters. We have all these different things that hopefully make students feel safe and secure. Any of y'all been into an elementary school classroom lately? I don't know if they do this here in Oklahoma, but I know my friend is an elementary school teacher in Florida. And if I'm home over this summer, I always like to go help her decorate her classroom because I'm like, I don't get to do stuff like this. I don't have a classroom to decorate. And I remember walking in last year and seeing this blue tape go across the room. And I was like, what is that? And she's like, that's for active shooter drills. The active shooter can't see us through the door if the students are behind this line. It's like, it just made my heart sink that that's something students literally have to do on a monthly basis. It's active shooter drills. But it's part of helping provide safety and security, right? And hopefully helping them feel that the school has implemented things that in case there were something to happen, they would be taken care of. Love and belongingness, we talked about how school systems provide clubs and organizations, bands, sports, you name it. All these things for students to feel a part of, to feel loved, to feel like they're belonging, because hopefully in those things they can find friends, right? For how many of y'all would still come to college if you didn't make any friends in college? Do you think? I don't know, big part of the college experience is that social aspect, right? It's a big part of that motivation. So the 2 pieces of Maslow's that we didn't get to yet were self-esteem. And again, this is where we start kind of getting into that intrinsic motivation, this need. What do you think Maslow means by self-esteem as a need that we have as human beings? What is self-esteem? How we feel about ourselves, right? Like we just want to have a good self-awareness, a good understanding of who we are. We want to be proud of who we are, confident in who we are. And a lot of that, and again, I think it's interesting that this one is after love and belongingness, because what gives us that sense of confidence or that sense of self-awareness and feeling good about yourself? Oftentimes how loved and belonging we feel, right? And so we do have that sense of we need to be confident in who we are and what we are. And once we do that, then Maslow says, then we'll achieve self-actualization. And that is that self-actualization when we'll be creative and authentic and meaningful and all those like really awesome things that happen when we're intrinsically motivated to do something. We'll do things because we enjoy them, not because we feel like we have to. How many of y'all feel self-actualized about being in college? Nobody? Bailey? Yeah. It's a hard place to get to. And so that's one of the hard things with Maslow's is just saying, well, how do we know when someone is at that self-actualized place? I would say you know someone's at that place when you can say they are truly intrinsically motivated to do something. Because if you're still having to meet those love and belongingness, even a little bit of that self-esteem, you're having to provide some extrinsic things to people to help them meet that need. And so they're still being extrinsically motivated to engage in the behavior. Okay. So the next theory, sorry, because we were supposed to get this far last time. The next theory that is kind of on that same premise of Maslow's, but a little bit different, is this dude called Herzberg. And he came up with this theory called the two-factor theory. And instead of having 5 levels that you need to reach or 5 needs that you have as a person, he calls these things factors. And there's 2 factors. They're either hygiene factors or motivating or motivator factors that are going to affect whether you're extrinsically or intrinsically motivated. And so it's interesting. The hygiene factors are more of those like safety and security or physiological needs that you may have, that when you don't have them, when they're missing, you are dissatisfied. You're not happy. And the connection there is if you're not happy about something, are you going to be motivated to do it? No, right? So then he says, well, if we can, as leaders, make sure people have their hygiene factors met, right? So they're not missing some important things, then we can look at providing them motivators. And so motivators are things that are satisfying, that are going to encourage you and spur you on to do stuff. So if we were to think about like what would you put in these 2 camps, what are things that you feel like you need to have in your everyday life to be happy? What are some examples? Caffeine, all right. I would agree with that, 100%. What would be another hygiene factor? Sleep, yeah. Food, again, we go back to some of those physiological things. But then think about like the work environment. What are some things you need that you're like, these are the like basic vital things I need to be happy at work? Get paid a decent wage. Would y'all say that's a hygiene factor? Okay. Because are you going to stay at a job that's not paying you enough to live? Probably not. Okay, what would be another hygiene factor from work? People you work with, so a good work environment, non-toxic work environment. Okay. So if all those needs are met, if you have all those things, then I'm trying as your boss to figure out, well, how do I keep you motivated or motivate you even further or like spur you on? And again, keep your intrinsic motivation up. What are some things then that you're like, I don't have to have them to be happy at work, but they would make me excited?
Work, birthday parties.
Work, yeah. Yeah, social things, right? Work birthday parties. When I worked at Auburn, we used to have a potluck every week, or not every week, every month, and it was themed. And like, it was so fun because random faculty would show up and actually like participate in the theme. Like, it was just a fun thing that we would do. What would be another motivator? Bring your dog to work day. That's actually a great idea. I like that one. What else? Maybe, like additional days of vacation, right? That like, hey, you've been doing really good. How about you knock off work at noon on Fridays? Stuff like that. So Herzberg is definitely focused a lot around the work environment, but again, it kind of tries to simplify some of these ideas that Maslow had. This is a crazy chart, but I promise it makes sense. The things at the bottom are things that we would consider can make work better, so they would be motivators, whereas some of those, or the things at the top are considered motivators. Things at the bottom are considered hygiene factors at work. So again, hygiene factors are things that if you don't have them, you won't be satisfied at work, so you're not going to be motivated. And Herzberg says that things like job security, knowing you're not going to lose your job, your status, relationship with subordinates, so the work environment, your personal life, relationship with peers, your salary, work conditions, relationship with supervisor, right? You want to have a positive relationship, hopefully, with that. And so once those things are met, as long as you have them, then these additional things can provide you more opportunities to stay motivated in that position or with that company. Opportunities for growth and advancement, added responsibility, the work you're doing itself, getting recognized for what you're doing, and then having some sense of achievement in what you're doing. So again, kind of this different take on looking at, in the workplace, how do we keep people motivated? Now, an interesting one here, and this is actually one of my favorite motivation theories. So again, it's spurring off of Maslow and this idea that as humans, we have needs. And he says that rather than there really being 5 levels of needs, that really as humans, we're motivated by one of 3 needs, right? And we may be motivated by some of these at different degrees, but for the most part, we can identify in people what they're motivated the most by. They're either motivated for a need for power, a need for achievement, or a need for affiliation. What do y'all think need for power is?
I know this is probably basic and like over the top, but like Hitler like wanting to become
Yeah.
you know what?
Yeah, it could be actually like wanting to be in power, having some type of authority, or it could be kind of that, I would say, non-discrete type power of like people just, they like the idea of positions. And again, getting promoted and even a little bit of just kind of being in charge. Have you ever had a friend that it just seems like they're doing stuff because they they want to be the officer of everything, right? You're not really sure that they enjoy what they're doing, but they just have this need to have a position. They can kind of have some type of formal authority or power that they're a part of. So McClellan would say that's one way to figure out someone's motivation. And he's not saying that one of these is better than the other. He's just saying that as leaders, we can identify people who are motivated by that, provide them opportunities then to have power. Or we could replace that with the word responsibility. Maybe they like being group leaders. Maybe they like being in charge of projects, right? So to keep them motivated, engaged in what you're doing intrinsically, provide them those opportunities to have those position powers. The second one is need for achievement. What's that sound like? If someone's motivated by their need for achievement, how would you describe them?
They want to be winners.
They what?
They want to be winners.
They want to be winners. They like getting awards, right? They maybe don't care so much about having like the top officer position, but they like being recognized for the things that they accomplish. Sometimes they like to always be winners, so they're very competitive, but at the same time, they could not be competitive, but be competitive with themselves and just say they like to do better than what they did last time. How could you, as a leader, provide these type of people ways to stay intrinsically motivated if you know they're motivated by the need for achievement?
It's like employee of the month.
Uh-huh.
Like salesman of the month.
Yeah, so any type of recognition program, any type of awards program. What I think is interesting about this is that if we just say extrinsic rewards don't work and they only work in the short term, we totally miss out on people who have a need for achievement if we just get rid of those things, right? And so I think it helps support that those things aren't bad in and of themselves. They may actually be needing the need of people who need them. And then last, we have need for affiliation. McClellan says that, all right, for some people it may not be a position. For others, they could care less about being recognized or rewarded for what they do. They just want to feel a part of something. They want to have friends. They want to know they have people they can collaborate with. Again, it's that idea of love and belongingness. A need for affiliation. Goes back to, again, why there are so many different clubs and organizations on college campuses. Students like to be affiliated with things, right? As a leader, what would you do to meet the needs of your followers who are motivated by being affiliated?
I think like in work or anything like how before we were talking like how when you were all like had parties and everything, if you have like planning committees or committees for different things.
Yes, so different ways for them to get involved and feel a part of the group. Having celebratory events. How many of your organizations that maybe y'all are a part of, like they have this professional component to them that's more business-like, but then you have social events, right? And it's always fascinating, at least this was my experience in organizations, is that not everybody would come to the professional things that you felt like were like the reason the organization exists. But you have a social event, everybody shows up, right? That right there could show you who in your organization is really motivated to be a part of it, simply because they want to be affiliated with other people. So providing those social events are just as important in student organizations as doing some of that professional development. Very important. And so again, you can kind of look at individuals, and it's really easy to kind of just see from observation, are they motivated by power, motivated by achievement, or affiliation? And again, you have all of these slides in your notes, so it's a lot of what we just talked about, and y'all can go back and look through them specifically. Now the MSI, pull out your results. Y'all should have taken this. The MSI, or the Motivational Sources Inventory, this is what we call a meta theory of motivation. So this is one of the more recent theories of motivation that's come out of research that has looked at all the different theories in research on motivation and said, we think we can really kind of boil this all down into one overarching theory. And what it says is kind of similar to McClellan. They don't call it needs, but they call it sources. And they say that as humans, there are 5 potential sources of motivation that we could have. And the thing is we're all going to be mostly motivated by one, maybe a little bit by some of the others, but we should have one area of motivation that really strives and pushes us on the most. And those 5 sources are intrinsic process, instrumental, self-concept external, self-concept internal, and goal internalization. I want you to have out your results just so as we kind of go over these 5, you can have a better understanding of perhaps maybe why you scored the way you did on this particular assessment. Okay. So the first one that we have is intrinsic process. This motivation source says that you are motivated by things that are fun. Okay? Intrinsic process. So how you can kind of make that connection with it's fun stuff is, again, if you're intrinsically motivated to do stuff, you're doing it because you enjoy it, not because you have to or people are forcing you to. Anyone have intrinsic process as your highest score of motivation source? Why do you think that does describe you?
Get bored easy.
Get bored easy?
And if I keep doing the same things, and I
like I said, I just get bored with it. I mean, I'm gonna do it to my 110% of my abilities, but I mean, I hate every second of it.
Right. And so for you, is change fun?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So anybody else that maybe it was like your top 2 or top 3? Okay. How would you say that describes you and your motivation?
I don't know, like I like to do fun stuff. I'm not a huge fan of change. Like it was tied with my second one. So like
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan of change, but at the same time I like it because it's something different.
It makes it new and it's kind of exciting. Yeah. And so, again, I think about my role as a teacher and trying to keep students motivated. I'm going to realize that probably 1/5 of my class is going to be mostly intrinsic process motivated. So what can I do in my classes to make it fun? I can't make it fun all the time, right? Because I'm having to meet the needs of everybody. But 1/5 of the time I can try to incorporate some fun stuff, right? That's something to be thinking about with these sources is, again, you can't be all things to all people, but it's keeping in mind the differences about people to then differentiate what you do to try to keep people motivated. The second source is instrumental. So if this was a high score for you, that means that you're motivated by money, promotions, and bonuses. So a lot of external things, and that is perfectly okay. Anybody in here score high? Your highest was instrumental. Anyone? I very rarely have college students who score high in here, but it's interesting once people get into the workplace, this sometimes becomes the highest motivator for people. Why do you think that may happen?
They get a taste of like what a promotion feels like in the pay raise.
Yeah. Again, it's kind of that effect, short-term effect of extrinsic rewards, and because our workplaces mainly function in a way that we try to motivate by money, promotion, and bonuses, that becomes kind of a short-term motivation for people. The third one is external self-concept. And this one's interesting. So this one says that as a person, you are most motivated by what others think or how others think about you. Anyone score high in this one? No one? Oh. So why do you feel like this does describe you?
I think sort of. I'm just like someone that likes, like when I'm representing an organization, I like to make sure that I'm representing them well, and I'm very conscious about what I do,
Mm-hmm.
kind of how I'm perceived like on social media and stuff, just because I want to maintain, and plus also, I want to go to vet school, so it's just kind of important to me to maintain a good self-image and how others will perceive me.
Absolutely. And so that's keeping you motivated to do certain things or behave in certain ways. Absolutely. I had a friend that she's Cuban, and in her family, family representation is a huge part of her culture. And so a lot of what she was she was the first person in her family to graduate high school, let alone go to college. And so for her, a lot of her motivation was, what was her family going to think of her? How was she going to be representing her family to other people who met her and knew her family? And so a huge part oftentimes of this external self-concept, it doesn't mean someone's self-conscious at all. It may be a part of their cultural heritage, and we have to recognize that can be a huge motivating piece for people as well. Fourth scale is this idea of internal self-concept. So instead of worrying about what other people will think of you, you're most motivated by what you think about yourself and what you think is important. Anyone score highest here? Okay. Why do you feel like y'all scored highest here? Why do you think this describes your motivation?
I'm like really competitive and like really hard on myself because like expect like a higher standard, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
So I don't really care what like other people think about me, but I always put so much pressure on myself to like be successful. But at the same time, I like also think about it because external self-concept was my lowest. But like I put so much pressure on myself to like represent myself well. So it's also kind of like what other people think about you.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, it was my highest because I want to beat the person that I am tomorrow and 10 years later down the road. And so if I can beat that person, I'm going to better myself. And even if I don't beat them, I know I'm going to be dang close.
I like that. Here's my question for y'all. So this one says motivated by what the individual thinks is important. What do you think is important? What for you is important? Like when you think about motivation for yourself?
How I like represent myself and how like me being successful and what I want to do, like how that like makes me feel.
Okay.
For me, it's like my faith and like, I really like riding horses and being good at it. That is like such a high thing in my life that like, I don't know, that like motivates like the majority of what I do.
Okay.
I really care about how I treat people, and I want to love them and love them well. And if I don't think I'm doing that, I really put a lot of pressure on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. So here's what makes this one complicated as a leader, is that if I know this is someone's highest source of motivation, I also don't know what it is because it's going to be different for every person, right? We all have different values and priorities. And so this is where it's really important as a leader that you do have that relationship with people to be able to figure that out on an individual basis. This is probably the hardest one to kind of throw a blanket thing at to try to keep people motivated. And then the last one is goal internalization. People who are highly motivated or have this as their main source are motivated by a cause, a collective goal. Did anyone have this as your highest source? Yeah. So why do you think that showed up as a high one for you, Ashley?
I guess I kind of associate a lot with like the affiliation, and like especially if it's like a cause I'm passionate about, like oh, let's spread the word, like I'm on fire for it because like I'm passionate about it. I want like other people to feel like just know how important it is, I guess.
Mm-hmm. People who tend to have this as like a high source of motivation for themselves, they tend to get involved with a lot of causes. They do a lot of advocating for whatever it may be. They also tend to be people who volunteer a lot and have a lot of civic engagement because they see this like collective need or collective goal and they try to work towards it. So they like feeling like they're working towards a part of the solution. So let's see. So that's simply, I mean, kind of the pieces that we were just talking about, like figuring out if you were the leader and you knew people were motivated by intrinsic process. Do y'all remember what intrinsic process is? Okay. What are some things you would do to try to motivate people with that particular source? They like to do things because it's fun. What would you do?
Maybe incorporating more of those like potluck dinners and
Yeah. So trying to find a way just to make things a little bit more enjoyable. Things don't always have to be business or so formal. There's a really interesting book, if any of y'all are interested in stuff like this. It's called Fish, the Fish Philosophy. If you can YouTube it and find some funny videos, but it's all about the fish market that's in Seattle. Any of y'all familiar with it? So they are known not only just for having like high quality fish that they sell, but it is like a show when you go to it. Like they are screaming, hooting, hollering, throwing fish through the air at each other, whatever. And so some researchers actually went there and did some like really lengthy observations. And we're like, we want to figure out like what makes this a place that people want to work at a fish market and that these customers just keep coming back and back and back. And like it's almost become a tourist spot in Seattle. And they call it the fish philosophy. And one of the pieces of it is this idea of play, that it is okay to incorporate play in the workplace. And so, you know, they could have this like very stringent line of like someone orders their fish, you get the fish, you wrap it, whatever. But like I said, you need to watch a video if you haven't seen it. People will order like whole fish and they will just take and toss them in the air down the line to people to catch. It's part of being a customer there. You can try to catch a fish if you want. But they just do things to incorporate play a lot. And that's something that, since I learned a little bit and read this little book about it, that's always stuck in my head is that, you know, it just doesn't have to be so formal and stiff all the time. Things can be fun. If you know someone's motivated by instrumental motivation, so they like things like bonuses and promotions, what have you, what can you do as a leader or as their manager to help them stay motivated?
Assistant to the regional manager, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking of like office references because I mean, I feel like it's like laid out so perfectly to match all these different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, find opportunities to promote. I mean, you always want to be careful, like, are we creating hierarchy where there's not really hierarchy needed? But are there opportunities, like, especially for people like this, if they're at a job where there isn't an opportunity to do more or work towards more, they're not going to stay with that company, right? So it is important for there to be some opportunity of promotion within organizations, right? You want to feel like your efforts are paying off and you're being rewarded, and also not just rewarded, but given this opportunity for development to move forward professionally. If someone has external self-concept as a motivator, so they're motivated by what others think of them, what can you do as a leader or a manager to help them stay motivated?
Maybe like give performance reviews.
Give performance reviews, and I would say frequent. So the worst thing you could do for this person is only do one performance review once a year, and it's a very like structured, we do it every June. You know, nobody wants to be criticized about something that they did 9 months ago, right? But you also, like, when you do something well, you want timely praise for it too. I don't know about y'all, but I feel this way. If I did something a year ago and I just now get told like, oh, good job, I'm like, thanks, that was a long time ago. You know, like the time has passed. And so I think it is important to have those reviews. And maybe you don't even call them performance reviews. It's just checking in. Maybe you meet with your employees more frequently than not. Provide opportunities to give praise. There's something about us humans that it's really easy for us to speak up in times of criticism, but we kind of just pass over, especially in the work environment when people do something well. Shoot off an email that says, hey, you did awesome at this meeting today. Or if you have someone you work with in a student organization that they just like blew it out of the water doing whatever, tell them that. They may really, really appreciate that, and that'll keep them motivated. If they feel like the stuff they're doing is going unnoticed, they won't stay motivated. Internal self-concept. So these are our people who are motivated by the things that they think are important. How do you keep them motivated as a boss or as a leader?
I think like what you said earlier, like having that relationship with them so you can kind of like implement stuff on like a case-by-case basis so you can try and fit everybody's needs.
Yeah. These folks really like to feel like they're being treated individually, right? So for me, I tend to score high on this, and like given my current situations, I like to know that like I'm not being stuck in a box as far as like when I have to be at work or what have you, because that just, you know, I like that I have a boss currently that will look at my situation that says, hey, I understand that you're doing pre-K teaching in the morning, so if you're not at work until 9 or sometimes 10, that's okay. You know, that flexibility. And again, just knowing that they're being treated on an individual basis because their boss understands the things that are important and valuable to them. Last but not least, if someone's motivated by goal internalization, and again, it's not about so much their goals, it's about this idea of being committed to a cause or a collective goal, the goal of a group. How would you keep them motivated as a boss or leader?
Maybe just like reiterating why you were there in the first place. Like setting like monthly goals like for your group to
Yeah.
That gives it more direction.
Absolutely. So kind of reiterating those things, clarifying what those collective goals may be, maybe putting them in charge of some of those. So like at work, if you need something done and you need to put together an action committee, these would be great people to put in charge of it because they're going to advocate, they're going to work towards getting that task done for the collective good of everyone, right? So these are just some ways to think about that. And again, none of this can happen as a boss or employee if you don't know the people who work for you. So again, that relationship piece ties in here and I think goes back to what we talked about with behavior theories, that task and relationship, got to have a little bit of both. In some situations, leaders need to be a little bit more relationship oriented in some ways. So to kind of wrap up this conversation about motivation, I have a TED Talk that I would like for y'all to watch. And Erin is going to facilitate kind of our debriefing of the TED Talk once it wraps up. I apologize, I have to step out for a meeting that I have to be at 10 o'clock. But make sure watch it, kind of take careful notes of things that he says that reiterates maybe some of the motivation theories we've talked about, or just kind of that big overarching picture of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And then before you leave today, make sure you turn in your you don't have to turn in your MSI homework physically, as long as you uploaded it in Canvas already, okay? All right, Erin, I'm gonna turn it over to you. And hopefully the sound's gonna work. Yes. Okay, sound.
I need to make a confession at the outset here. A little over 20 years ago, I did something that I regret. Something that I'm not particularly proud of. Something that in many ways I wish no one would ever know. But that here I feel kind of obliged to reveal. In the late 1980s, in a moment of youthful indiscretion, I went to law school. Now, in America, law is a professional degree. You get your university degree, then you go on to law school. And when I got to law school, I didn't do very well. To put it mildly, I didn't do very well. I, in fact, graduated in the part of my law school class that made the top 90% possible. Thank you. I never practiced law a day in my life. I pretty much wasn't allowed to. But today, against my better judgment, against the advice of my own wife, I want to try to dust off some of those legal skills, what's left of those legal skills. I don't want to tell you a story. I want to make a case. I want to make a hard-headed, evidence-based, dare I say lawyerly case for rethinking how we run our businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, take a look at this. This is called the candle problem. Some of you might have seen this before. It's created in 1945 by a psychologist named Carl Duncker. Carl Duncker has created this experiment that's used in a whole variety of experiments in behavioral science. And here's how it works. Suppose I'm the experimenter. I bring you into a room. I give you a candle, some thumbtacks, and some matches. And I say to you, your job is to attach the candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip onto the table. Now, what would you do? Many people begin trying to thumbtack the candle to the wall. Doesn't work. Some people, and I saw somebody kind of make the motion over here, some people have a great idea where they light the match, melt the side of the candle, try to adhere it to the wall. It's an awesome idea, doesn't work. And eventually, after 5 or 10 minutes, most people figure out a solution, which you can see here. The key is to overcome what's called functional fixedness. You look at that box and you see it only as a receptacle for the tacks, but it can also have this other function as a platform for the candle problem. Now, I want to tell you about an experiment using the candle problem done by a scientist named Sam Glucksberg, who's now at Princeton University in the US. This shows the power of incentives. Here's what he did. he gathered his participants and he said, I'm going to time you how quickly you can solve this problem. To one group, he said, I'm going to time you to establish norms, averages, for how long it typically takes someone to solve this sort of problem. To the second group, he offered rewards. He said, if you're in the top 25% of the fastest times, you get $5. If you're the fastest of everyone we're testing here today, you get $20. Okay, now this is several years ago, adjusted for inflation. It's a decent sum of money for a few minutes of work. Okay, it's a nice motivator. Question, how much faster did this group solve the problem? Answer, it took them on average 3.5 minutes longer. 3.5 minutes longer. Now this makes no sense, right? I mean, I'm an American, I believe in free markets, that's not how it's supposed to work, right? If you want people to perform better, you reward them, right? Bonuses, commissions, their own reality show, incentivize them. That's how business works, but that's not happening here. You've got an incentive designed to sharpen thinking and accelerate creativity, and it does just the opposite. It dulls thinking and blocks creativity. And what's interesting about this experiment is that it's not an aberration. This has been replicated over and over and over again for nearly 40 years. These contingent motivators. If you do this, then you get that. Work in some circumstances, but for a lot of tasks, they actually either don't work or often they do harm. This is one of the most robust findings in social science and also one of the most ignored. I spent the last couple of years looking at the science of human motivation, particularly the dynamics of extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators. And I'm telling you, it's not even close. If you look at the science, there's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what's alarming here is that our business operating system, think of the set of assumptions and protocols beneath our businesses, how we motivate people, how we apply our human resources. It's built entirely around these extrinsic motivators, around carrots and sticks. That's actually fine for many kinds of 20th century tasks. But for 21st century tasks, that mechanistic reward and punishment approach doesn't work, often doesn't work, and often does harm. Let me show you what I mean. So Glucksberg did another experiment similar to this, where he presented the problem in a slightly different way, like this up here. Okay? Attach the candles to the wall so the wax doesn't drip onto the table. Same deal. You were timing for norms, you were incentivizing. What happened this time? This time, the incentivized group kicked the other group's butt. Why? Because when the tasks are out of the box, it's pretty easy, isn't it? If-then rewards work really well for those sorts of tasks, where there's a simple set of rules and a clear destination to go to. Rewards, by their very nature, narrow our focus, concentrate the mind. That's why they work in so many cases. And so for tasks like this, a narrow focus where you just see the goal right there, zoom straight ahead to it, they work really well. But for the real candle problem, you don't want to be looking like this. The solution's not over here. The solution's on the periphery. You want to be looking around. That reward actually narrows our focus and restricts our possibility. Let me tell you why this is so important. In Western Europe, in many parts of Asia, in North America, in Australia, white-collar workers are doing less of this kind of work and more of this kind of work. That routine, rule-based, left-brain work, certain kinds of accounting, certain kinds of financial analysis, certain kinds of computer programming, has become fairly easy to outsource, fairly easy to automate. Software can do it faster. Low-cost providers around the world can do it cheaper. So what really matters are the more right-brain, creative, conceptual kinds of abilities. Think about your own work. Think about your own work. Are the problems that you face, or even the problems we've been talking about here, are those kinds of problems where they have a clear set of rules and a single solution? No. The rules are mystifying. The solution, if it exists at all, is surprising and non-obvious. Everybody in this room is dealing with their own version of the candle problem. And for candle problems of any kind, in any field, those if-then rewards, the things around which we built so many of our businesses, don't work. Now, I mean, it makes me crazy. And this is not, here's the thing, this is not a feeling. Okay, I'm a lawyer, I don't believe in feelings. This is not a philosophy. I'm an American, I don't believe in philosophy. This is a fact. Or as we say in my hometown of Washington, D.C., a true fact. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let me marshal the evidence here, because I'm not telling you a story, I'm making a case, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Some evidence. Dan Ariely, one of the great economists of our time, he and 3 colleagues did a study with some MIT students. They gave these MIT students a bunch of games that involved creativity and motor skills and concentration. And they offered them for performance 3 levels of rewards. Small reward, medium reward, large reward. Okay? Do really well, you get the large reward on down. What happened? As long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay? But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Then they said, okay, let's see if there's any cultural bias here. Let's go to Madurai, India and test this. Reward standard of living is lower. In Madurai, a reward that's modest by North American standards is more meaningful there. Same deal. A bunch of games, 3 levels of rewards. What happens? People offered the medium level of rewards, did no better than people offered the small rewards. But this time, people offered the highest rewards. They did worst of all. In 8 of the 9 tasks we examined across 3 experiments, higher incentives led to worse performance. Is this some kind of touchy-feely socialist conspiracy going on here? No, these are economists from MIT, from Carnegie Mellon, from the University of Chicago. And do you know who sponsored this research? The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. That's the American experience. Let's go across the pond to the London School of Economics. LSE, London School of Economics, alma mater of 11 Nobel laureates in economics. Training ground for great economic thinkers like George Soros and Friedrich Hayek and Mick Jagger. Just last month, economists at LSE looked at 51 studies of pay-for-performance plans inside of companies. Here's what the economists there said. We find that financial incentives can result in a negative impact on overall performance. There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what worries me as we stand here in the rubble of the economic collapse is that too many organizations are making their decisions, their policies about talent and people, based on assumptions that are outdated, unexamined, and rooted more in folklore than in science. And if we really want to get out of this economic mess, and if we really want high performance on those definitional tasks of the 21st century, the solution is not to do more of the wrong things, to entice people with a sweeter carrot or threaten them with a sharper stick. We need a whole new approach. The good news about all this is that the scientists who've been studying motivation have given us this new approach. It's an approach built much more around intrinsic motivation, around the desire to do things because they matter, because we like it, because they're interesting, because they're part of something important. And to my mind, that new operating system for our businesses revolves around 3 elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, the urge to direct our own lives. Mastery, the desire to get better and better at something that matters. And purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. These are the building blocks of an entirely new operating system for our businesses. I want to talk today only about autonomy. In the 20th century, we came up with this idea of management. Management did not emanate from nature. Okay, management is it's like, it's not a tree, it's a television set, okay? Somebody invented it, and it doesn't mean it's going to work forever. Management is great. Traditional notions of management are great if you want compliance. But if you want engagement, self-direction works better. Let me give you some examples of some kind of radical notions of self-direction. And what this means, you don't see a lot of it, but you see the first stirrings of something really interesting going on. Because what it means is, it means paying people adequately and fairly, absolutely. Getting the issue of money off the table, and then giving people lots of autonomy. Let me give you some examples. How many of you have heard of the company Atlassian? Okay, it looks like less than half. Atlassian is an Australian software company, and they do something incredibly cool. A few times a year, they tell their engineers, go for the next 24 hours and work on anything you want. As long as it's not part of your regular job, work on anything you want. So that engineers use this time to come up with a cool patch of code, to come up with an elegant hack. Then they present all of these stuff that they've developed to their teammates, to the rest of the company, in this wild and woolly all-hands meeting at the end of the day. And then, being Australians, everybody has a beer. They call them FedEx days. Why? Because you have to deliver something overnight. It's not bad. It's a huge trademark violation, but it's pretty clever. That one day of intense autonomy has produced a whole array of software fixes that might never have existed. And it's worked so well that Atlassian has taken it to the next level with 20% time, done famously at Google, where engineers can spend 20% of their time working on anything they want. They have autonomy over their time, their task, their team, their technique. Okay, radical amounts of autonomy. And at Google, as many of you know, about half of the new products in a typical year are birthed during that 20% time. Things like Gmail, Orchid, Google News. Let me give you an even more radical example of it. Something called the results-only work environment, the ROW. Created by 2 American consultants in place at about a dozen companies around North America. In a row, people don't have schedules. They show up when they want. They don't have to be in the office at a certain time or any time. They just have to get their work done. How they do it, when they do it, where they do it, is totally up to them. Meetings in these kinds of environments are optional. What happens? Almost across the board. Productivity goes up, worker engagement goes up, worker satisfaction goes up, turnover goes down. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are the building blocks of a new way of doing things. Now, some of you might look at this and say, that sounds nice, but it's utopian. And I say, nope. I approve. In the mid-1990s, Microsoft started an encyclopedia called Encarta. They deployed all the right incentives. All the right incentives. They paid professionals to write and edit thousands of articles. Well-compensated managers oversaw the whole thing to make sure it came in on budget and on time. A few years later, another encyclopedia got started. Different model, right? Do it for fun. No one gets paid a cent or a euro or a yen. Do it because you like to do it. Now, if you had, just 10 years ago, if you had gone to an economist anywhere and said, hey, I got these 2 different models for creating an encyclopedia. If they went head-to-head, who would win? 10 years ago, you could not have found a single sober economist anywhere on planet Earth who would have predicted the Wikipedia model. This is the titanic battle between these 2 approaches. This is the Ali Frazier of motivation, right? This is the thriller in Manila, all right? Intrinsic motivators versus extrinsic motivators. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose versus carrots and sticks. And who wins? Intrinsic motivation, autonomy, mastery, and purpose in a knockout. Let me wrap up. There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And here's what science knows. 1, those 20th century rewards, those motivators we think are the natural part of business, do work, but only in a surprisingly narrow band of circumstances. 2, those if-then rewards often destroy creativity. 3, the secret to high performance isn't rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive, the drive to do things for their own sake, the drive to do things because they matter. And here's the best part. Here's the best part. We already know this. The science confirms what we know in our hearts. So, if we repair this mismatch between what science knows and what business does, if we bring our notions of motivation into the 21st century, if we get past this lazy, dangerous ideology of carrots and sticks, we can strengthen our businesses, we can solve a lot of those candle problems, and maybe, we can change the world. I rest my case.
Alrighty. So we're just going to finish up the last couple minutes of class with a couple of discussion questions I put together. So the first one being, I know a lot of y'all are ag ed and stuff. I was ag ed, so I see everything through that lens. But he talks about how what we do doesn't really match up with what science says. So why do you think that is in a lot of our organizations and our educational institutions? Why do we focus so much on this extrinsic motivation? What do you think?
In a way, I think that's easier than like figuring out like intrinsic, like each person's motivator, just to give everyone like a collective like reward.
Yeah.
Or something to work towards.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to say, here's your grade, that's your reward, than it is to get inside of people's heads and work with what they find to be motivating. So, despite there being a huge emphasis on money as a motivator, why do you think it doesn't work? We talked last class about how they did that study with money and how when kids got good grades, they would get $50 or whatever. Why do you think that doesn't last very long with motivation? We all love money. We all like making money. Why doesn't it motivate us? At least not in the long term.
I think it gets to the point that you just get used to it and it doesn't have the same thrill of it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Like we always like us women just want more and more, and so if like the amount stays at $50 and everyone's like, well, I should be doing more now. Done it for more months in a row or whatever. So it's like people are just wanting more, and so they get like discouraged from.
Yeah. Yeah, those are both awesome thoughts. So, what are your thoughts on the 20% time or the row model that he mentioned? And do you think those could work in every situation?
I love it, but I also like have seen a negative side of that because that's kind of how I felt like last semester when I was suddenly thrown online because I kind of gave up on school. I like wasn't actually motivated. If I was like in a work environment, I was getting more out of it, I guess, than just like a grade. Like I would really like a structured business like that because I think it allows for a lot more creativity.
I'm going to kind of call out some of my ag ed people. Y'all are going to be in the classroom here soon. Do you think this would work? How could you make it work? Maybe for those of y'all that are leadership, that are going to be maybe extension agents or work in an organization. How do you think this could work?
I think it all depends on like what type of thing you're trying to go work for. So if you're like a teacher working in education, you can't just like not show up and teach your class. But if you're working for like a business that you can do work at home or that may be where people can be more creative. But if you're in the classroom, like there's not room to have that. Like, come in when you want or all that stuff.
Anybody else? Y'all, I'm used to teaching high school. I can stand here all day. All right. How can we kind of shift from extrinsic to intrinsic in our own lives or with the people around us?
just like kind of analyzing like what it is that motivates us, like why, if you're like not getting anything out of like being extrinsically motivated, like if that's still not fulfilling for you, like you lose motivation after a while. I think it's just like reflecting on why you're even in this position in the first place, like why you're even teaching or in school, and just like focusing on that, your intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
I think a really tangible thing would be as simple as like for my students someday, like giving them the quiz or whatever we just took, and like honestly like taking into account like what motivates them and see if they're there for like the grade or if they're there for the experience, I guess, and seeing what I need to focus on.
Yeah. And I know when I was like doing my student teaching and everything, you get to know these kids and they will tell you all kinds of things about themselves. And that will help you outside of like, I know not all of y'all are going to be teachers, but in general, learning about the people around you. What are they interested in? What are the things they like? That's going to help you find those intrinsic motivators. An example, I taught ag mechanics. A lot of kids didn't want to just like sit around and learn about basic stuff. They wanted to actually do projects that they could take home, things that were interesting to them. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I don't know if we're going to have a quiz yet, just because I have to have my meeting with Dr. Klein, but just look on Canvas. I'll try to have everything together. But yeah, have a great weekend.